Put gasoline in my arms today. Time is 6:32, and we'll call to order the meeting. Members present: Mike Ahern, Chair; Rhonda Bishop, Vice Chair; John Ramlett, Pat Roach, John Kelly, Dick Lewis, Selectmen's Rep, and Ray Gosney is the Selectmen's Alternative.
Paul Wilson is excused, and
Bob Dragon
is excused.
No public, so we'll move on to item number 4, it's administrative. So we've got some minutes to...
I have extra sets if anyone has any.
What am I missing? Sharon, the only minutes I seem to have are the July 19th
That's
ones.
all I have.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I may have passed these out.
prior.
I'm sure I did prior to, so.
Uh-oh, didn't bring up.
Anybody else need sets? It would be June 21st, June 7th, and July 19th.
If you have enough.
Great. I just need the 7th and the 21st.
You need the what?
7th and the 21st, yeah.
Do you have the 7th?
Nope. Cool.
Dick, you have the 7th?
No, I do not.
John, do you have
Okay,
any?
well, Rhonda's going to have to look on, I guess.
All I got is July 19th.
I have the 21st, you could have that, but I didn't have enough on the 7th. Maybe you can just take a minute and peruse.
All right, so let's...
Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, Rhonda, you can borrow
A
mine.
couple minutes right now to look at it.
Sure, you can borrow mine.
June 21st. That first. No, give it to him.
Do you want my copy? I can find it.
We can probably go through this very quickly, unless there's a lot of issues that people need to bring up. Is looking at June 7th. Is there anything on the first or second page? Third or fourth? Last page? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion to approve the June 7th minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of approving June 7th minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, that brings us to June 21st. Anything on page 1, 2? 3 or 4? Motion to approve the minutes for June 21st.
So moved.
Okay, second. Mr. Roach, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. And July 19th, anything on page 1 or 2? 3 or 4? Okay, motion to approve the minutes from July 19th.
So moved.
Mr. Renlet?
Second.
Second by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. That brings us to item number 5.
Nothing of any consequence for the board.
Number 6.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I was jumping ahead, but unfortunately, our speaker had to postpone at the very last minute, and he would like to come and speak to us in September, so we won't have a speaker this evening. So we'll get right to our work.
So that brings us to our report of committees. Board of Selectmen, Mr. Lewis?
At the last meeting, I updated the board on the fact that the planning board had sort of taking a shift from the master plan to the corridor study, and given the economic importance of Tenny Mountain Highway, they thought that was a good idea and are interested in that project. We also had an update from the Energy Co-op on the project for the new poles that have been installed, and, you know, sort of the fact that they're new and big, you know, kind of have raised the eyebrows of some people. And one of the things that they mentioned was that they're going to be working with the different cable companies and phone companies to get all the wires moved over. It is going to be a little bit of a time-consuming process, probably could be 6 to 8 months kind of a thing, really depending, you know, some of it has to be sequenced and some of it has to go through review and to sort of make sure everything gets done in the proper timing. But there is a process for that, but they are going to try to move that along as much as
And the old
possible.
poles.
And then get the old poles removed.
Call here, zoning board?
Zoning board, let's see, we didn't have a quorum on the 12th for our last work session, so we didn't go through this. So the zoning board did meet on the 10th and had a successful application approval for a special exception on Hunt Road for a family recreation compound, one family, not commercial, non-commercial. So that went through. Folks were happy, so.
Here was someone from the Newfound River watershed that wanted me to, Bristol or the Newfound River watershed, is within the watershed of Newfound, that application that went to zoning?
I'm not sure, but it's Hunt Road, but it's very
Right.
close to the Plymouth side.
I know that, did someone from them contact you concerning that?
No.
I don't remember them in the name.
Yeah. I mean, do they think it's a commercial application? I mean, this is, you know, it's it's like essentially a 5-bedroom house, but it's not, because it's all rustic, and it's going to be off the grid, and they're going to have, I believe, composting toilets and stuff, so there's no huge impact for water. But, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to them. It's a bit of an anomaly, but it passed muster for all our regulations and stuff, so I guess people are curious, but they can, I can't think of the gentleman's name, I should know it, because I've spoken to him before, but they can certainly give me a call.
Ken?
The director?
Yeah, I think so. 744, I'll give you the number.
Yep.
5990.
744-590-5990?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, give me a call.
That brings us to Rhonda for the water and sewer. Okay. Mr. Kelly for the Pemmichwasit River Local Advisory Committee.
We had a meeting last Tuesday, and the main shout of that is they're worried about groundwater and in the anticipation of what we might have 100 years from now, and they're trying to figure out what to do now to prevent what we're supposed to do in 100 years from now. Water quality and quantity, political climate, state support for water quality protection, major tributaries and invasive species. The other thing that I'm going to be asking for is for the town of Plymouth to give more money for various activities that they have, such as water testing and so forth. So that's going to add another, they already get $200 a year, but it's going to add an additional amount to the charitable activities in Plymouth.
Is Dave Jeffers still?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Roach on the Plymouth Regional Emergency Management Committee.
The committee has not met recently.
Town planner report.
We have received application for site plan review for Riverside Landing. Came in the last day of the application submission period. Our engineer has just gotten the plans. I am just getting the notifications out, and we will be looking at those two lots, the two lots that will hopefully be subdivided, because as you remember, there was a continuation from July 19th on that, so we have to remember to maintain a sequence. So we will definitely be meeting on August 16th for the continuation of the two-lot subdivision from McGinley/Riverside Landing, and then depending on how much we can digest, the two separate requests for two separate site plans. They're small, but nonetheless, there are two of them. So.
And that brings us to item number 7, which we are going to delay until our...
The 6th.
The 6th of September.
Yes. Mr. Call wears several hats, but he also is one of our water commissioners.
Right.
So he's pretty well versed in water.
That brings us to item number 8, unfinished and other business.
And I think so everything else went out. You all got your packages, correct? Right.
Yes.
Yeah. This agenda went out first, just to be a place marker, so that should probably say discussion rather than distribution, but it's just semantics. Well, first of all, I'm going to pass out a couple of things. Everybody gets yet another copy, you've received this in the past, of the notice of decision for Mountain View Farms for the condominium project, which was the essence of the issue being that their subdivision of the entire project was vested and their site plan was not. So we'll start at the beginning of this again. Just because I know I've given this so many times, everyone's probably misplaced it by now. Very much. Oops. Now, you all got a letter of a report essentially back from Attorney Radigan. The final letter, it was in that package, correct? Everybody's got their copy of that?
The June 8th letter?
Pardon me?
June 8th letter, right?
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Okay, so to go along with that, I have copies of two applicable statutes which are stapled together. the revocation of a recorded approval, and also a 5-year exemption. In terms of vesting for site plan and subdivision in 2011, the legislature saw fit to expand the time frame somewhat for these two land use processes from 12 months for active and substantial to get established, and with that, it was a 4-year overall exemption once it was vested, to not have to deal with any changes in our zoning. Now those two numbers have swapped over from 12 months to 24 and 4 years to 5. However, this project came in under the original limitations, so we just got to keep that out there, at least at this point in time where we are right now. What we do in the future with this, it's a different ballgame because the rules have changed. Also, and this is kind of a, I won't say a juxtaposition, but a different, or another take on it, that Dick Lewis had put together earlier on when we were first dealing with this. He has some thoughts on how we might proceed in this case. As you know, the time frame for the site plan did expire in May. But what we're needing to determine tonight, and there's some discussion to be had because there's a bit of opposing views on this, the statutes versus what Attorney Radigan has said that the board is charged with doing via our site plan regulations. So I think we need to start the discussion at the top, and it's open for discussion for sure. Does everybody have their site plan regs? I did bring my copies. There are 2 sections in here that we'll be looking at, so I guess, I don't know, I guess we'll start with, I know John has a question, but in a moment, we'll start with Attorney Radigan's letter, and then you can look at the suggestion that Dick has made on how we should proceed, and then we have a conversation. I will say, however, I had given Harry and Dale Lackey a heads up on this. They have had a copy of the correspondence from Attorney Radigan. They could not make the meeting this evening, even just to listen and observe, so they're very interested in coming next month, but we'll get to that point when we get through this discussion. As you can see in John Radigan's letter, paragraph number 3 says, plan expiration is really a question for the board to examine. Our site plan regulations address when a site plan expires. Of course, it does speak to vesting / active and substantial. And then the 3rd paragraph on the 2nd page, the fact that there is no level of work specified in either the town's site plan regulations or in the site plan approval per se, which is that notice of decision. It refers to it, but it doesn't define it. John says to us that that does not mean the board cannot make a common sense determination of whether active and substantial has begun on the site in accordance with the terms of the approval. So I think we're right back to where we started again, folks.
Mr. Chair, can I just... It just seems, after reading, I read Mike's letter before and just reread it again, what you just said, I mean, I think it is common sense, and substantial is defined pretty easily. I mean, I build electronic circuit boards for a living. It's not substantially done until it's almost done. We don't put one part on and say we're substantially done. So it's pretty clear that's not substantial development has started in the project. Yeah.
Well, there's no...
Yeah,
nothing.
right, yeah. So, I mean, I think it is common sense, and when Radigan says we can make a common sense decision, I think that's what we reached before, was that, there's no active and substantial development.
I mean, this all comes down to the fact that it was very much a conditional approval.
Right.
As you've seen, with many conditions. And the active and substantial seems to be the one that is still outstanding. And of course, begin within 7 years of the date of this approval, which was the date that just passed this past May 5th, so.
One comment that you brought up when you made this decision a month or so ago was that there hasn't been any substantial changes to the zoning that would make anything like a hardship on them. That's, was my understanding when we made that decision.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, at some point, Dick, you probably want to jump in and, I mean,
I guess, I mean, do you make that statement from the perspective of maybe they should have an extension, or they shouldn't? I guess I'm not sure.
where are you coming from?
I mean, I guess sort of the point I raised in my May 8th memo was that, I mean, I raised that point that, I mean, there hasn't been any significant changes, any real changes at all, you know, to the site plan regulations. I think the one thing that does come into play for this particular project is, and it could be significant, are the changes to the alteration of terrain regulations on the state level. And because of the fact that their alteration of terrain permit expired
It's much more stringent now.
several years ago, I mean, they're going to have to go through a very stringent and rigorous review process and potentially a plan revision process to bring the project into compliance with stormwater regulations and, you know, layout and impervious area and just sort of all the things that go into, you know, a project of this size. I guess one of the options I laid out in the memo is that, you know, maybe, and the water may be over the dam on this one, with the horse out of the barn, but, you know, the board sort of said, yes, we'll give you an extension, but only under certain conditions. And the condition is you don't start anything, obviously, until
Okay,
you
can I
get
get one?
that alteration of, that new alteration of terrain permit. And if that new plan and new permit results in any kind of a change from the plan that has already been approved by the board, then they're obligated to bring that revision, that revised plan, back to the board
you're-
for some sort of consideration.
If I could just put this, just reiterate that, so make sure I understand, and everybody else should, because this is so confusing. You're saying that the premise, under the premise that we can't tell whether or not there's been active and substantial because we didn't define it, then therefore, one option would be to go ahead and give them an extension, but the extension perhaps, without all kinds of money and time on their part, won't come to any fruition because the alteration of terrain is going to be so hard to satisfy for
Yeah, and
so it's a de facto
yeah,
halt.
I mean, it's hard to know what a revised plan is going to look like, but it could be, there could be some significant changes. You know, again, just because it's a tough site, I mean, as we all know, there's some drainage issues there. You know, dealing effectively and properly with drainage through that alteration of terrain process could be cumbersome, you know. I mean, that's how cumbersome it is or how easy it is just is yet to be determined, because they've got to start that process.
I mean, quite frankly, I was surprised to get this kind of an answer back from Attorney Radigan. You know, not having a general definition of active and substantial in here, which we definitely have, that's on our list of things to do immediately, nor a site-specific one. I was surprised that he felt that the board could go forward, you know, under their own volition and duly authorized and blah, blah, blah to say it, but he did. So, I mean, Dick's making a valid point, Attorney Radigan's making a valid point. It's you guys, it's
I mean, I
up to
guess-
you guys.
Well, I mean, it just, one more thought. I mean, I think to some degree, though, I mean, I think we did make a decision that that they didn't satisfy active and substantial. I mean, clearly, nothing has happened, so it's hard to make any kind of a straight-face argument that they have satisfied any component of active and substantial.
Mr. Roach?
I have a question for Mr. Lewis. So what you're proposing is that we approve a 24-month extension, that they must start some kind of construction within 24 months, but only after they meet the state's alteration of terrain requirements? Is that the way I read it?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the conditions sort of in that option. But I guess the one thing, this memo was dated the 8th. I mean, I think we took a vote on it early May, it was like May 5th.
May, because that's why, took a vote with the caveat that we run this by the attorney, and there was a little bit of a delay, and then it, the way things go, now it's back here 60 days later, but this has been on the table for a long time.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I guess I'm just a little concerned that given sort of the length of time between May and today, I mean, here we are almost 3 months later, to sort of go back and say, oh yeah, we'll give you a 24-month extension. It's so after the fact at this point that, maybe just saying to them, you got to start again.
Well,
and we, go through that revocation.
I mean,
process.
I don't know if the board wants to poll themselves, but the impression I got, and this is just simply from sitting over here in the corner, was that when the board voted against extending that expiration back in May, that was definitively how you felt. I mean, Dick and I had a couple of conversations after the fact, both being planners, that because this was so odd and unusual and had kind of devolved somewhat, that perhaps it was not, it was still in play in terms of an approval, because all the variables were vague and undefined. Attorney Radigan has come back and said, well, that may be so, that the substantial was undefined, but nonetheless. So now it is 2.5, 3 months later, so. Does your,
Just a question. My mind is not 100% clear as to what occurred in May. I just don't remember exact language that was used. I think it would be helpful for the planning board to actually make sure you have in front of you the motion that was on the table that you voted on.
I think I do.
The planner could read that. I think it might add a degree of certainty as to what exactly occurred in that. Because right now I'm trying to recollect.
I'm not, well, I think this is it, I hope so, May 3rd.
From what I remember, we had a big discussion on what was,
I've got it.
I mean, we argued that point for quite a while.
It says-
What was and what wasn't.
The record says you weren't here. May 3rd?
I was sitting here. I wasn't part of the vote, but I was here.
Okay, so that's the incidents where the transcriptionist didn't start recording you sitting here, okay. All right,
I wouldn't
Okay.
expect it to show me voting, that's for sure.
no, okay. John, okay, there's 2 or 3 pages of discussion, and I can pass this around if you like. The last entry says, John Kelly, this is under work session, John Kelly made a motion to allow the 60-day extension to move the question, I expect. Motion seconded by John Ranlat. All opposed. Motion to allow a 60-day extension does not pass. From that May, that's right, it was very judiciously applied that the expiration was 2 days before our work session.
Right.
So we really had to hop to it on this, and anyone can look at these.
Was it May?
So we said
May
no,
3rd, yeah.
Yeah.
so we said no to allowing,
An extension, and then if,
Requested.
and I know Dick's a big boy and he can talk for himself, but I'm just, because I have all the paper, I'm trying to put something comprehensive out here for information. So I think that's the point where you had the concern that what had actually transpired was that no extension of the expiration had gone on, so they didn't get any extra time. The date was gone, but it was somewhat in limbo, you felt,
Well, I guess.
the actual,
Yeah, I mean, the other sort of and maybe I just sort of read the thoughts of the board, but I had the strong impression that through that vote, the board thought that the project was no longer valid. It was kind of wiped, the slate was wiped
Ended.
clean. And, one of the issues I raise here in the memo is that the only way to wipe that slate clean is to revoke is to revoke the approval through a very specific process spelled out in the
Right, which
RSAs
is-
that involves a public hearing, notice to the abutters,
Yeah.
sort of full-blown
Yeah.
type of a thing.
It's the reverse of what you would do,
approval,
yeah.
Yeah. So I sort of felt like maybe the board was, there's a lot of overlap between sort of vesting and, the rights assigned under RSAs for, 24 months or 12 months or 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or forever kind of a thing. It's, Sharon looks at this all the time, and I look at it all the time, and, sometimes your head just wants to explode.
Need a
It's so
flow chart.
complicated. And the legislature has
Keeps
kind of
changing.
modified some of the timeframes in that RSA probably 3 times in 5 years or something like that. It's been retooled time and time again.
Right.
So that adds to levels of confusion.
When the housing market economy, everything, started going so downhill, the legislature reacted, and there were a lot of projects, this is just a sidebar, that had gotten stalled out, so they were making compensation for, if the project came in between this period and this period, it was for, 36 months and 48, we were going crazy trying to track stuff. So they settled on 4, and now it's it was 12 and 4 at the last outset, now it's 24 months and 5 years,
So if this
hopefully it's-
project had come in a year later, they would have fallen in.
Well, they might have been under something else, but they were so far back that the new statute, unless there's a new application, doesn't apply at this point.
One thing that I understood for them to continue, we'd have to come back to the planning board, get more stringent review by the state.
Yeah.
As I understood, that would probably give an extra level of protection for the people in that neighborhood that were already there. And was I wrong to think
Yeah,
that?
I think you very well may, because again, so much of alteration of terrain deals with stormwater management.
And that was the big issue. He came before us and said, the economy's bad, work with us, and we were all,
And also, another issue was, because so much time has expired and his project has been stalled out, Plymouth Woods has gone forward, the neighborhood has changed in terms of the, not impacts, but it's just changed. There's more build out and this and that. So his project would be reviewed perhaps in a different context, because way back in 04, 05, Plymouth Woods wasn't there and
right.
that kind of stuff.
Mr. Gosnell?
Yes, on the question. I appreciate the chair allowing me to speak up. It is the sense that I'm picking up on discussions over the last several months that there is a desire to see the project move forward, but move forward in a manner that addresses a lot of the, I'll use the expression, drainage concerns that have come to the town's attention over the last couple of years. With that backdrop in mind, and with the language that the town planner just shared with us about the vote that was taken in May, I think it's fair to say that the project is in a state of suspension right now. No question about that. And I believe that has been conveyed to the Blackies, that we did not grant an extension. Excuse me, the planning board didn't grant an extension. I think the question that comes to my mind is, it really goes to what you just spoke to, as chair, that if there is a way to appropriately move this item so that it does come back in front of the planning board again in a way that we can apply the current standards that the state has introduced, I think it meets the desire of being responsive to the builder's request of the planning board to try to work with them, and also meets the expectations of the citizens over there, and that we keep the project active by bringing it back in front of the planning board with the clear understanding that conditions are now subject to review based on state standards dealing with drainage.
Well, it was before, but they're more stringent, much more stringent. They're going to have a higher threshold of,
And if we had given them an extra year, or what they were asking for, the state would have not have applied that more stringent standards.
no, I'm trying to remember, I don't know where it is. Do you recall, their alteration of terrain expired a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It was before the expiration date. It was before they came to, not before they came to me, but before this got before the board, their alteration of terrain was headed out the door towards expiration.
Yeah, that might have expired in 2009.
Something,
10
yeah.
maybe.
So it's been out of, so to speak, out of compliance with the higher standard in place for quite a while.
But no matter how you look at it, they still got caught up with the tough economy and...
Yes.
Right, I mean, that's the other side of the equation about trying to balance things here, so.
Would it be fair to state that one of the approaches that fit this particular situation is to require them to submit a revised site plan proposal to move this item forward? I'm trying to,
Yeah, no, I
I'm
know.
looking for the town planner when I say that.
No, I know.
Just to keep it as simple as possible, that
Well,
we need a revised site plan that meets current standards.
I guess before that, is it appropriate for you folks to see who feels, as does the attorney, that, I mean, we got to determine its status right now. I mean, I don't want anybody to be disenfranchised here because of, Mr. Kelly, I think, has made a statement on his opinion of this
Is that about
process
650?
tonight. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Bishop.
No, I just have a question. It was my understanding when it was going to expire, a few days prior to our last meeting on this discussion, that when we didn't grant it after those 2 days, it was totally dead. And they would have, in order to be revisited or brought back up, then they would have to present it to the board as if it was new. That was my understanding. I don't understand when Mr. Lewis says that we should, in order to finalize this, because then it brings me to think of all the other issues in past and coming present, that we all have to kill every one of those that have died to vote on it, to make it,
Well, this was,
a closed file.
this was a conditional approval, and for starters, and conditional approvals have to have every condition met or adjudicated one way or another. Let's just say every condition met to become final. So they had a, if you will, temporary approval, but it was for 7 years, and that's where the expiration date came in. So, in a perfect world, there would have been a definition for active and substantial development. We had to default back to that. Our attorney is saying that the lack of definition a definition for that terminology is not necessarily important. But which in my mind says the approval is nullified, but that's me. That's not you guys, and I don't have a vote.
Yeah,
Just to try to clarify. It's maddening.
I have a lot of sympathy for what the developer is going through. And if this means that they go for a more stringent review and lose, instead of, was it 39 lots, they're losing a substantial amount because of that, I do have some empathy for them. And I would hope this board would try and do what we could to work with developers in this town.
I mean, Mr. Gosning's, the suggestions have been good. I'm just saying, I just want to make sure everybody is literally on the same page here, because you don't want to come back when we go to Plan C and then have people misunderstand or thinking it was A when it was C.
I have a question on that.
Yes, Mr. Roach.
Do we need to officially revoke it, like Attorney Radigan says, or can we just leave it as is and assuming that the black is going to apply to the state for alternation or terrain at some time, and then we'll see how that plan looks at that point.
Personally, I think because the AOT level of compliance standards have risen and Plymouth Woods is in there, you could ask, as Mr. Gosling said, the applicant to come back with a revised, with a revised site.
Yeah.
Because they would have to, at the very least, deal with Plymouth Woods being.
Right.
At the very least. That ties into alteration of terrain. It's the same site plan, it's a little bit in limbo, but it's been quantified a little bit more.
Right.
But by that, you're saying de facto that it's still viable, if you will.
Yeah,
We don't go into the revocation aspect.
Right, and I kind of agree with Mike, and we'd like to work with the guy. I don't think we want to revoke it. That sounds so final. We're revoking your application, start from scratch kind of thing.
Right.
However, we don't just want to let it just go in limbo forever without some kind of update to what they're doing, to meet the new requirements. So I think, Mr. Gosling said to come forward with a revised application after they satisfy the state's requirements.
I think that's,
Revoking sounds kind of final, so that's...
I'd like to leave the window open for them if they can meet somehow the new higher standards with the state, with drainage, with all the issues that we've heard over the past year or so. If they can meet everything, then, boy, I'd like to work with them.
Well, one thing we'll have to do in the interim before they come before us is get the definition. And it can be loose, but it has to be something. It doesn't have to be in-depth because it's site-specific of what constitutes active and substantial development in our site plan regulations. Even verbiage, a 15%, 25% percentage of the roads, blah, 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 utilities, and something like that. And then when and if you do allow this new site plan to come in and go for an updated approval, I guess, would be, then you have specific language in there about active and substantial, because that's where your 24 months kicks in, because this would be new, or essentially new, under the new laws and stuff. It's in motion. It's about 8 balls, and they're all going in that place.
At the bottom of page 1 of my memo, in that suggested sort of pathway for the board, the modifications, number 1, Roman numeral 1 at the bottom, talks about the term active and substantial, and I just tossed out a thought that I had in looking at the plan for the project of that, sort of tying active and substantial into the construction of Treetop Roadway, which is the main roadway that serves the project, from the intersection with Crescent Street to do sort of one of the northerly loops. And that's sort of a similar type of a roadway development, somewhat consistent with the type of roadway development that they did for the subdivision, as far as kind of creating that loop roadway. And put a 24-month period in here, and then left the window open for another 24-month period. Again, Ray talks about bringing in a revised site plan. Given the economy, they may not want to spend the time and money with an engineer to go through the new updated AOT review on the state level for another couple of years. And I guess, the question is, if the site plan regulations don't change, which would impact, or the zoning ordinance changes, that impacts how many units they have and the design of the project and those kinds of things, sort of the question you asked, what level of penalty should be applied to them if nothing changes that impacts the project, other than maybe the AOT, which they're going to have to go through anyway.
It just seems like with the new stringent standards that the state would apply to them, it would really substantially change the designs that they've already had engineered.
Yeah, it very well could. Very well could.
I mean, I'd like to think that maybe they could work with the design they have and make enough changes to protect the people that are there, but I'm not an engineer, and it's hard to sit here and make those types of assessments.
I mean, I
How
could,
you judge what the actual impacts are going to be until you actually engage the engineering analysis and see what the predicament
Is there,
be.
is there any type of, we brought Mike in so many times to this, haven't we?
At this point, that's way premature. I mean,
I think it's up to Blackie and his engineers to
this is finished.
generate a plan that goes out to, Mike to some degree, but primarily goes to the AOT office at Department of Environmental Services.
So by us not putting the nails in the coffin on this, it leaves it open for them to come back to us.
Well, if you agree in fact, because you have two options here, and I don't mean to belabor this, but if you agree that what you voted on in May was only, which it was, only about a yea or nay on a 60-day extension, and that the site plan is still in limbo.
All right, so we could just leave it until see what Blackie does, and
Or, as, Attorney Ogden said tonight, you can determine that the conditions haven't been met, or all of them, particularly that one. I mean, it's up to you. I know this is very frustrating, but it's taken this long with the back and forth, and legal opinions and back and forth and then moving past that bona fide expiration date, so.
We haven't heard much from you, Mr. Renlet. What are your thoughts?
I am
Head is spinning.
Yes. I thought when we approved this and we denied the 60-day extension, what I'm seeing is that, we were basically killing it at that point. There's a procedural setup of revocation of the recorded approval, and that should be the next step, if, in fact, that was our position, that active and substantial had not been met, there was going to be no extension. Then this should have been, the revocation of recorded approval should have been the next step, correct?
Yes, if that were, but we feel there was a misunderstanding.
I feel there was
No, not you, no, but it's,
It just,
it makes my head hurt.
Well, I thought what was happening is we were defining active and substantial. We agreed that they had not met that requirement, and because of that, we were not going to grant an extension. And according to the letter, it was not vested, and that was it. At that point, we, through the regulatory procedure, we should have started this revocation of recorded approval.
Right, but because we needed to in my recollection, which could be faulty, it was, we needed one more go-around with Attorney Radigan to make it crystal clear about the active and substantial. Was that not a loophole because the board failed to define it? And he said, no, it's not a loophole.
Right.
He has since said that.
Exactly, and I think it.
Finish up.
Well, my thoughts are, okay, that's something we have to address, but the board determined at this point that to the board's satisfaction, it had not been met. And now, yes, we can go and we can define that, we can put it in the site plan review and regulations, but it would not go back and affect anything else.
For that.
Yes.
Mr. Goslin, do you have a comment?
Yeah, pick up on the suggestion that, I use that term suggestion Mr. Roach put on the table, and you actually spoke to. I believe that by any measure, if you look at that development, the development is not active, has not been active for a period of years. If you look at the term substantial, I think any reasonable definition of substantial is going to be something that moves at least toward that 50% level of actual accomplishments on the ground. That certainly has not been met in any way, shape, or form. So if you look at the two terms, active and substantial, it has not been active for a number of years, and the actual work that's been accomplished to date is not substantial by any reasonable, that's the word you used, any reasonable standard, regardless of what the particulars might be that the town planners is suggesting we need to get to, which I think is a great idea. But using what you just said, one of the approaches you could take in your communications, if you chose to go down this path, to leave a door open for the developer to come back in, is to use the phrase that the alternative, if we don't hear back with a revised site plan, is to consider a revocation. So that you actually let the developer know that if they don't come back, you're probably left with no other alternative but to at least undertake a vote to revoke it. Kind of stealing your two ideas.
I like that.
Well, I mean, again, in my opinion, I mean, my thought was when we took that vote that that is what we said. Active and substantial had not been complied with. We were not going to grant an extension, and that, you know, this revocation process should have been started at that time. Now, since it hasn't been, then again, what Ray has said and what Pat has expounded on.
Mr. Chair, if you take that approach, it does something that I think is important to you. It puts the ball back in the developer's court as to what the next steps are going to be.
I think,
Now, my thoughts are, if we do that and the board decides to do that, there should be a time limit put on that. I mean, it's not going to be 5 years, it's not going to be 3 years. I mean, we need some closure on
Dick's
this.
concerns is.
Yeah, I mean, I put the 24-month in that proposed modification motion, because that's consistent with what's in the RSA right now as it talks about active and substantial. So I just tried to sort of mirror that a little bit.
But isn't, because this is an updated site plan without prior revocation, it would be like a new, you know, updated, essentially. So wouldn't the old 12-month period still apply? I mean, not to be picky, but it's, because it's such an odd duck here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the board wanted to stick with the 12 months, we could do that. And then I'd say, instead of giving them one 24-month extension, maybe we give them 2 or 3 12-month extensions. I mean, sort of my thought in my draft sort of suggested language or concept is that, you know, we give that they be provided an opportunity to sort of move the project forward, you know, without kind of the big penalty of having to start all over again. I think the one thing, you know, kind of after, and some of these thoughts, you know, I wish I'd sort of had all these thoughts in my mind at the meeting on May 3rd, but, you know, some of them just kind of percolated up later. But, you know, the whole issue with active and substantial it's not in the regulations or the statutes to sort of kill a project. It's all in relationship to if there was a change to zoning or site plan regulations, does or does not the project need to conform to those regulatory changes?
Right.
And again, in this case, I mean, there's been some minor tweaking to zoning and site plan, but nothing that really impacts
Right, because if
this
someone
project.
were to drag their heels on purpose without this protection, they could change and change and change and still not have to, you know, have their due diligence under the zoning.
my feeling is, this is such an unusual circumstance of the economy. And I think if there's anything that we can do to work with the developer, I think we should give them every opportunity. As long as there are some protections for the landowners, and given that there's new development that's already happened. So if there's a way that that could happen, I would love to put it back on to them, to, we're receptive to hearing what you have to say, rather than, we're not going to shut you down, don't even bother. I hate to say that to them. Is that kind of the sentiment of the board? Or is...
Well, I mean, what timeline are we talking about? Again, 24
Yes.
months, 12 months, a couple of times?
I would just interject to caution you, if you are going to go forward with this, I don't think you should allow this grandiose timeframe. Certainly, I think it's very unfortunate the economy went south, because this particular project had such a long timeframe to begin with. I know it was going to be phased, but I think that was problematic in and of itself. And I certainly wouldn't want to see this particular application, or any application in this situation, compounded by, let's give them, I mean, you want to be fair. You don't want to undercut them and say, we're giving you 12 months and you'll never get an extension, because that's just an exercise in futility. But I think when and if the board goes forward on getting an updated site plan from these folks, you want to be very mindful of not allowing more time and more time and more time, because you're going to be right back where you started again.
And I think...
I mean, because otherwise, we're doing the same thing we're doing here. We're 2005,
Right.
we're in May, now we're in
August.
July,
And it would all...
And, I mean, that's my thought. We need to, whatever we're going to do, we need to make a decision on it, and I think, it has to have a pretty quick timeline.
Well, if
That's my opinion.
And that would give an opportunity for another public hearing,
Oh,
or...
absolutely, that
Oh,
whole
yeah.
process, it has to be renoticed. And,
You have to have the public hearing for the revocation also.
oh, yes, yeah.
So either way, I mean,
He's going to have to...
we have some procedural involvement.
I will just remind you again that I don't think Harry Blackie will be available on September 6th, but Dale is coming. So, not to push this off, but I don't know if you folks want to go ahead and make a definitive motion on how you're going to proceed at this point, or you want to wait till, I don't know. That's just FYI. But I don't want to stall this out anymore either, because we could go on like this for the rest of our lives.
Could we table this until we hear from Blackie?
You won't hear from them until September 6th, and that's their prerogative. I mean, they couldn't make this meeting, and I said you being the board, needed a chance to digest Radigan's letter, Dick's suggestion, the RSAs, the whole ball of wax here.
Yes, Mr. Enlow.
Well, my question is, they knew 12 months, 2 years ahead, this point was coming. And, then they basically, at the 24th hour, want extensions. That the board, I mean, if you know something's coming up, you prepare to meet that. And, if it was coming before this board and talking, you don't do something that, I don't think you do something that substantial 30 days ahead of time, I mean, that's something you look at 6 months ahead, and, then if we're working on it and we're going 3 or 4 months later, we're still not there, then you ask for a 60-day extension, I can see that. But to wait, till the 24th hour and then request an extension, and, you're not going to do anything till September, I don't know. I have a little bit of a problem with it. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but that's just my opinion.
I mean, I guess I'd chime in that, I think if they were to start tomorrow, fresh with their engineer, and give that engineer the marching orders to, review the plan, review all the new site plan, or not site plan, excuse me, alteration of terrain requirements and regulations, and develop a new plan for submission to the state that's going to satisfy the AOT requirements. And that's probably going to be a 2-3 month process. I mean, that's not going to happen between now and September 6th.
It's not going to be cheap either.
No, it will not be. Yeah. And, they may end up with the same number of units, but a whole different drainage scheme. They could end up with less units. I mean, that's an unknown factor at this point. I guess I just so the board is aware, one of the reasons I put together this memo is that I felt that the project was just kind of hanging, and someone earlier used the word limbo.
Exactly.
It's just kind of hanging out there.
Exactly.
And I think one obligation that we have to any applicant is finalize something so that they know which way to go. And just sort of having it hanging, I think, would be uncomfortable for anyone, no matter who the applicant was.
So
Mr. Roach?
does it sound like we need to define some kind of time limit on before it gets revoked? I mean, as opposed to...
I like Mr. Gosney's suggestion of letting them know that a revocation is a possibility, but that we would like to hear from them within a month or two. I kind of like that suggestion, but it's up to the board.
Well, what is the reason that September 6th is?
That's just the next meeting.
That's the next work session.
Next work session you're having. And I was just going to say, you don't have to decide on this tonight.
Yeah.
But it is a month away, and whatever. I mean, if you need time to boil this all through and revisit your original conclusions and decide whether you change your mind or whatever, particularly in the light of I think the most important document right now, at least to my mind, in this whole mess, is that the town attorney said, I fully well realize you did not do the definition of what, on something that you had based, that your conditional approval hinged on. However, you are still authorized to make, a thoughtful and coherent decision because you've been through the process, blah, 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 blah. So I think this is important. I'm not trying to sway you. I'm just saying that one of the reasons that it took so long for all this to come to pass is I think the board was a little bit over a barrel because, or not this board necessarily, but however the process went through, that one caveat was never satisfied. And the conditional approval definitely hinged on it. But because so much time has passed, the attorney has revisited that and said, just because you don't technically at this point in time have point A to point B on a certain road in the original notice of decision doesn't mean you can't make a coherent and well thought out decision.
If I could restate John's question another way, the reason that the developer is proposing to come in front of the board on the 6th is, what's the objective?
To see what I say our collectively, discussion was on this, your recommendations, and I have been told that they may have some more ideas on another section.
Another what?
Another plan, so to speak.
For this law.
Totally new.
I don't mean a plan per se, I mean another approach, shows.
Mr. Gosney?
With that in mind, just to restate what you said, don't actually get a sense of the board that you will entertain a vote at next month's meeting on the 6th as to the action that you would propose to take, but have the town planner convey to the developer that the two items that you will have under consideration on the 6th are a willingness to entertain a submittal of a revised site plan, and in the absence of that, you will likely undertake a vote to revoke the existing site plan. That makes it very clear to them the sense that you currently have, not action that you've taken, but the sense of it, and puts them on notice that they need to come in prepared on the 6th to meet expectations that you may have about how to move forward with the project, or if you don't have that action, you may take to the vote.
Is that 30 days going to be enough for them? You don't know.
That's
They
what
may
they're
show
asking
up, they
for.
may
I
not.
mean, you know, that's the thing, how long, once again, you get into the how long, drawn out,
And-
because you're
and-
chasing.
And I think what Ray said hits it right on the head. I could agree to that, and just formally send them a letter explaining just what Ray has said, and that it's September the 6th. We want to hear from you. We want to see what you've got, and we're going to take a vote. And this is what the vote could be. And, you know, come prepared. I mean, no more, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
All I was going to say is, you know, no more delays. Let's sit down, let's talk, let's see what's on the table, and then we're going to make a decision. And, you know, at this particular point, you know.
And if they don't come with what the board feels is
We're not-
valid, viable, I'm not just an outline of what you think you want to,
Right.
because that's just protracting.
Exactly.
I agree with that also. I think they should be made aware that we will be discussing, possibly voting on the revocation if they don't
Revocation,
have
yeah,
any
I agree.
plan to move forward.
Mr. Lewis?
I'm just connected to what Ray and John said. I think the other question they really should answer is, what's your timeline for submitting a revised plan?
Yeah.
DES and the
Put that in
AOP.
there too, yeah.
Because if they don't have any idea,
Right.
Exactly.
Well, right,
you
that
know,
would be,
we're going to get it done in 4 months,
yeah.
then, you know, maybe doing the revocation and just kind of starting from scratch
Well, I will
may be
mention-
the best way to go.
Yeah, I would definitely mention a resubmittal on the AOT, I would advise an update sometimes they
Yeah.
have. And as you said, you know, best case scenario, that's 2 or 3 months if you could go now.
Because I think sometimes patchwork when, okay, this is what it originally was, and this is what it's changed to, and this is what we're going to do, and here we're going to go. There's too many loopholes and too many ways to get around
It
it.
needs to have an end date at some point.
For you guys to track it, it's
Yeah.
a nightmare for me to track.
Well, I'm sure it is.
I mean, you know, you can't even remember what we were talking about,
Well,
because we need a 40-foot schematic.
Yeah,
And, I mean, you and I were trying to get the timeline on this. and-
yeah. I mean, that's almost impossible.
Definitely.
If you want to, I guess maybe you make, if you get into discussion, make a motion, do that, and not authorize you to do this.
Would it also, could we also put them on notice in a letter, if we decide to do this, that there's some questions about the drainage that was, no.
That'll come out
I
in the
think,
process. if it
yeah,
works.
yeah, I mean, in the process of re-permitting and everything else, or the revised site plan, they have the new compliance and everything, and that's just part of it. I don't even think we want to go to that subject. What, you know, I would make a motion that we authorize Sharon to submit a letter to let Blackie know where we stand, what we expect for the September 6th meeting, and we will have the meeting. You know, we are considering revocation of approval, and they need to come, or, so your eyes.
No, I was just sort of thinking, I mean, I support your direction here, this is good.
Okay.
Is there a way to shorten that?
Just
Authorize Sharon to,
relaying your concerns.
relaying our concerns and our options
Right,
for the
September 6th meeting.
September 6th meeting.
Yep.
And a second.
fine.
I'll second it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I guess just, I was squinting my eyes, I was counting in my head. I mean, if at the meeting on the 6th,
Yeah,
you know, they don't present anything of substance that satisfies kind of the concerns that I think everyone has, can we decide on the 6th to hold a revocation meeting on the what's the next day? It'd be the 6th, 13th, the 20th. The 20th doesn't give us enough time to advertise it. So it would have to be in October.
It would have to be
Yeah,
October.
which is okay, yeah.
We could address that at that time.
Yeah, there's no time crunch to that.
I think it's important they just realize there's got to be an end date at some point, you know.
It's got to.
Well, yeah, and I apologize, no, I'm not going to apologize.
No.
I'm sorry, general principle, I did this, that, this has been some convoluted, but to get, and once again, to get to that point where it was very clear how empowered the board was in the absence of this definition. Took some time, but hopefully we will learn something. All right, well, I will do that, and if they can't make it or whatever, then you guys can decide on the 6th how to proceed. I'm not even going to tell you if they can or they can't fully show up, because that is going to be the date that things are dealt with.
You have something to pass out to us with the corridor study?
Oh, wasn't that new packages? I thought the girls,
It was dominated by the Riverside Landing thing.
oh, they didn't fully, that was the last minute. Well, if we want to adjourn, if everybody wants to wait an extra 5 minutes, I'll hand out your party favors on the way out. So I've got the document downstairs.
That's fine. That's fine.
Like,
Do we have more lively part? Do we have hats?
So there, no
I'm
public?
sorry, I thought it was going out, but apparently it didn't, so.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr.
just a
President.
comment, not on the public, but a comment on behalf of last year Dick and again this year myself. The bylaws changed that you guys have been adhering to were an alternate, regardless of whether it's somebody like Mr. Gagan or somebody like myself, allowing us to participate in the discussion even though we don't participate in the vote. I know both Dick and I have appreciated that over the past 2 years. I think that was a wise decision to make that actually. It was kind of informally happening in the past years, but by actually making it part of your bylaws, thank you for that, because it's been very helpful to make sure that, again, for the last 2 years, we tried to make sure we're always here so that if one of us can't be at the table, we're also very current in what you've been doing. So thank you for that.
And I think in Dick's job and your years with the planning board, I mean, it helps us. I think we have a good mix, and, if we're going one way and you see, okay, we've been there before and it's come up to bite us, then we don't want to go there again. So it's been a great help, and I think it works for everybody's betterment,
Places a bird on the chair. I know that. So thank you for that.
I'll just mail that out to you folks.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, all it is an executive summary of the Route 25 corridor plan and what Country Council did, and I added updated traffic counts.
Oh, more recent
I
traffic
think the
counts?
summary, I looked through it briefly, it's going to show clearly that it's really out of date. So, it kind of just shows us where we need to go
Okay.
rather than anything
Good.
substantial.
So that brings us to item number 10.
Can I just jump in, and I won't go on too long. I think, sort of one of the lessons I take out of the discussion on Mountain View Farm in kind of it bridges into a little bit of the Lowe's project in that, both site plans have, definitive, sort of quote-unquote drop dead dates. If you don't start this or you don't complete it within a year or 2 years or 3 years, the project is sort of quote-unquote expired. And I guess the suggestion I have is, I think maybe during a workshop meeting in the fall, I think the board could take a look at the site plan regulations, because sort of being so defined, is a little unfair to the developers, because we're in a very different economic time right now.
Oh, exactly.
And I think we need to be, aware of that and give them some flexibility. We don't want to give them an open checkbook, so that if a regulation change happens that's going to make the project better or, more environmentally sound to the residents of Plymouth, we don't want to cut them, cut that option out, but, sort of being a little bit more business friendly, balancing regulatory provisions and RSAs and, what's in our local regulations.
But I think we still want them to, I mean, if there's a substantial period of time that we do grant them, that, you know, new requirements come along, and they come along for a reason, and
Yeah.
they need to be complied with, and they just need to understand they have to go that extra step
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
So, I mean, we're given and they're given, so. But yeah, that's,
And a lot of times, it's the humans that sit on this board that can kind of understand where they're coming from. It's very expensive for those engineering drawings, and that's why we're here on this board, I think,
Yeah,
many
it's a
times.
balance between the regulations and the human factor. Speaking of which, one small but very important proactive thing I did, and I don't know why I brought these copies, because you guys don't really use these anyway, but I checked, no, I mean, it's just not in your purview. This is just an administrative update on our planning board schedules, but I have expanded the application dates for submission to 21 business days prior to the meeting, because I was not having enough time and having to scramble and to get it to department heads, to get it to Mike Vignelli. You know, the squeeze always came down to the planner, and the applicant needs to be prepared and submit ahead of time, in proper time, so we can do our jobs properly. So it was 16 days before, I have bumped it up to 21 business days.
Makes
So
sense.
hopefully that'll straighten out some of this mess, because it wasn't a problem, but I know that perhaps folks will say, well, what the heck's going on? I haven't seen anything in the paper. Well, we can advertise in any paper that has circulation in Plymouth, but the Plymouth Record, which is the one that most people read, you know, it's a weekly, and the deadline was coming in like that day that.
Then you were
the
receiving
application-
stuff,
No,
yeah.
and I was like, well, that's gone.
Yeah.
You know, so it was-
And the deadline's like 3 o'clock or
I
something.
have tried to
right?
save myself a little bit of stress
Yeah.
and add a few years to my life, and.
Yeah. I think that
hopefully-
deadline's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, too, or something.
Yeah, you get at 12:30, the deadline's at 3, it's like, no, and then somebody interrupts you.
Right, yeah.
You can fly. But anyway, hopefully, you know, we'll keep ironing these processes out so that it's easier.
Makes sense.
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, I think the Board of Selectmen voted to use the citizen.
Because it's daily,
Because of the daily.
right.
Um,
Yeah. Well, we can.
Yeah.
We can, but I mean, if, you know.
Also gives you broader coverage.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's heavier, but it's broader for sure.
All right, now we're looking for something.
Yes.
Motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, we got a second?
Sure.
All right, so moved.
All right.
It is 7:50.
All right.
All right.